When it comes to healthcare, there's perhaps no other country in the world that shares more similarities with the US than Germany. They've got employer-based insurance, a multi-payer system, and one of the most expensive healthcare systems in their respective area. Yet, when first released for purchase, you'd pay $969 in the United States to buy the exact same Novo Nordisk Ozempic pen that costs just $103 in Germany. Where did all that money go, and what's the justification for our higher prices? Well, despite their similarities, there's a couple of significant differences that separate these two healthcare systems, essentially making care far more affordable for German nationals than Americans. Let's get into all that. Before we get into the missing $866, we need to address a reality. The US is not going to completely overhaul its 100-year-old healthcare system into a government-run single-payer model anytime soon. So if we want to figure out how to help fix American drug costs, we need to look at a system that is similar to the US but has figured out how to control those costs. And like I said, surprisingly, the US and Germany share very similar healthcare DNA. Here's a rapid-fire look at how similar our two systems are. Both countries legally require you to have health insurance. Germany just actually enforces their penalty, while the US zeroed out theirs years ago. Just like the US, most Germans get their insurance directly from their job. Both the US and Germany use your income to determine your options. In Germany, making around 75,000 US dollars puts you in a massive nonprofit public fund for the middle class. In the US, our public option, Medicaid, is strictly a poverty safety net, and it's very difficult to qualify. In California, at least, you have to make less than $22,000 a year. Good luck surviving in California on that. Germans aren't forced into one single government plan. They can choose their fund, and high earners can opt out entirely to buy private, for-profit insurance, just like the US. Both nations' laws force insurance to cover a comprehensive baseline, including hospital stays, some mental health in certain cases, and prescription drugs. And that's where the similarities end. While the foundation of the healthcare system is similar, the way they buy drugs is completely different. Let's get into where that missing $866 went. So I do need to say something here. There's no way I'm going to be able to get into every nuance of the different costs for weight loss drugs and diabetes drugs like Ozempic. So I'm just going to focus on the list price. This is the price that the manufacturer or drug company sets at the beginning. While Ozempic costs have come down in the US, something we'll get into in a second, for the most part, you're going to still pay way more money to purchase these drugs in the US than in Germany. Public service announcement over. Now, when the drug was released to the United States, without insurance, Ozempic was priced at $969 for a month's supply. Basically $1,000 for 4 pens taken once weekly. And remember, this is a long-term drug. Most studies that showed its effectiveness ran for 68 weeks. And if we're conservative and say somebody's only taking this drug for a year, that's roughly $11,600 over that year. But Ozempic is typically prescribed if you have diabetes. It's not the primary drug for weight loss. If you want the weight loss version of Ozempic because you don't have diabetes, you're likely to be prescribed Wegovy, which had an initial list price of $1,349 a month, or $16,188 for the year. That's ridiculous. For reference, in Germany, Ozempic was priced at $103 and is almost exclusively prescribed for diabetes, which is one of the reasons why it's more inexpensive there. And Wegovy, the weight loss version, is not usually covered by Germany's health fund, so Germans pay the cash price for Wegovy of $328 a month. Here's what our yearly totals would be for an American and a German both buying Wegovy at the initial list price. So why is it so much more unaffordable in the US? Well, in Germany, when a new drug comes to the market, there's a single negotiation that takes place between the seller and the buyer. The seller here is the drug maker, so Novo Nordisk, and the buyer is an umbrella organization that represents all of Germany's insurance companies, or what I call those sickness funds. Experts have said that in the German system, there seems to be an agreement between the two sides that drug prices must be high enough to allow innovation, paying to discover new drugs, but low enough for people to be able to afford to buy. And one more thing to add here, once the negotiations are finalized and that drug price is set, the German system is very public about that price. They're very transparent, they tell everybody about it. And a whole different chaotic scenarios playing out in the United States. Here's how it works. Once a new drug gets approved by the FDA, the government basically hands the drug maker a golden ticket. They get market exclusivity and patent protection. That means zero competition for a number of years. And unlike Germany, the US government doesn't step into a room to negotiate a baseline price for the initial non-insurance drug price or for work insurance plans. Instead, they just step back and they give the pharmaceutical company total freedom to slap whatever initial list price they want to put on it. And if you're an American trying to get that drug covered by your health insurance, you're now subject subject to a massive network of hidden middlemen known as pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. Insurance companies hire these PBMs to decide which drugs actually make it onto your insurance plan. But the profit model is just broken. See, PBMs negotiate secret rebates and take a cut that is based on a percentage of the drug's initial list price. So if the drug maker tries to do the right thing, and let's say they bring a product to the market with a low list price, the middlemen in this scenario don't make a big enough cut. And if these PBMs aren't making enough money, they simply will refuse to put the drug on their insurance plan. And if it's not on the insurance plan, then the patient probably has to pay for it out of pocket at that super high initial list price. Here's what the former CEO of a major drug company said about America's high drug costs.
If you bring a product to the market with a low list price in this system, you get punished financially and you get no uptake because everyone in the supply chain makes money as a result of a higher list price.
And unlike Germany, you'll rarely know what a PBM rebate was. They don't actually have to share that data. It's legally protected information for them. Basically, they're not posting all of their prices for everybody to see like the German system. Making matters worse, experts say that Ozempic costs between 89 cents and $5.02 to make for a month's supply. So where does all that money go? If you were to talk to one of the CEOs from one of these major weight loss drug companies, they'd likely tell you that even though a country like Germany pays around $300 for these drugs, and it only costs $5 to actually physically manufacture them, the drug company still isn't making enough at that price point to sustain their business. How is that even possible? Well, in fairness, research and development costs an astronomical amount of money. Novo Nordisk invested billions in developing semaglutide, conducting extensive clinical trials that followed thousands of participants over multiple years. That is a massive amount of money invested up front. Second, when they were first released, GLP-1 meds exploded in popularity, which actually created a massive shortage. From a purely business perspective, why would a drug company lower their prices if demand outpaces supply? It just doesn't make any sense for them. Third, drug companies argue that selling these drugs to countries like Germany at heavily negotiated cheaper prices doesn't cover their global R&D costs. Essentially, they claim they have to rely on massive profits from the US market to subsidize the lower prices that they're forced to accept around the world. And there's actually a fourth reason, even though I would guess most pharmaceutical companies would never mention it as a reason for the US's high drug costs: marketing. Unlike Germany and literally every other country in the world except randomly New Zealand, the US allows direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical marketing. Novo Nordisk spends hundreds of millions of dollars here. You see the celebrities on commercials talking about these weight loss drugs, the targeted ads, the sponsorships, all that. And all of this marketing is baked into the American price tag. So is all this enough to justify the price of the drug in the US along with some measure of profit for taking the risk to develop it? Or is this just excessive profit gouging? Well, I think it's important to take into account the price drop we saw in the United States for some of these weight loss drugs following the introduction of a legal loophole. Because of the massive demand we talked about and the FDA officially placing these weight loss drug medications on their national drug shortage list, and when a patented drug is in shortage, federal law allows specialized compounding pharmacies to legally create and sell custom generic versions of that medication. So suddenly Americans were able to bypass the middlemen entirely and buy compounded semaglutide, the active ingredient in Ozempic and Wegovy, for a fraction of that list price cost. And wouldn't you know it, faced with a sudden influx of cheaper competition, plus competition from their rival Eli Lilly who released their own drug, Novo Nordisk magically found a way to start offering lower prices and bigger discounts in the US. And this shows that the initial sky-high list price of almost $1,000 for these drugs was not because they needed to recoup R&D costs or to keep their lights on, it was because they could get away with charging that amount. But I don't want to completely idealize how they do things across the Atlantic. It's worth noting that the German healthcare system is currently facing some major, very real challenges of their own. Subscribe if you'd like to learn more about those in the future. This is Tyler Dutchover. Thanks for watching.